Spiderman No Way Home is out, which means it's time to update my MCU ranking. Now, there are only a handful of these movies that I don't like. The MCU has a pretty solid batting average, and there's 27 of these movies now. And I'm not even counting the Disney Plus shows. If you count the Disney Plus shows, there's like 30, like over 30, but I'm only counting the movies. So just because something is lower on the list doesn't necessarily mean I don't like it. It just means I think the other ones are a lot better. So, of course, it's almost 30 movies, the majority of which are great. There's going to be really good ones that are lower. So let's get started. Coming in last place at number 27 is Eternals. This is an incredibly boring movie with forgettable, bland characters, a plot that's all over the place, and convoluted mythology. It's not even really connected to the MCU apart from the post-credit scene, and even then, it's barely connected. At the end of the day, I feel this is a story that didn't really need to be told. Number 26, Incredible Hulk. Nothing happens in this movie until the last 20 minutes. Nothing. It's barely connected to the MCU, apart from like the last minute where Tony Stark shows up. And it set up Tim Blake Nelson to be a villain, which still hasn't come back. And since Bruce Banner was recast after this movie anyway, the whole movie just feels inconsequential. Number 25, Thor the Dark World. This movie has way too much exposition, a lame villain, and it's just very forgettable except for the parts with Loki. Number 24, Captain Marvel. This is to the MCU what Solo was to Star Wars, a movie that answers questions nobody was asking. The only difference? Solo was actually fun. Solo was actually witty. Solo was actually enjoyable. But yeah, questions we didn't need answered are answered in this movie. How did Nick Fury lose his eye? Where did the name Avengers come from? Also, with the 90s music and alien animal sidekick, it feels like they were trying to replicate Guardians of the Galaxy. This feels like Guardians of the Galaxy if they had made it during Phase 1 when they didn't really quite know what they wanted the MCU to be yet. Number 23, Thor. The film is well shot. The fish out of water story is decent. Tom Hiddleston is great. But compared to later films in the MCU, it's pretty forgettable now. Number 22, Iron Man 2. The biggest problem is this movie's a bit overstuffed. It's got too many plot lines going on at once. Tony is dying, Whiplash wants revenge, setting up the first Avengers movie, Justin Hammer. It's like too many plot lines, but they could have stuck with like maybe one or two of them. You didn't really need as many plot lines as you did, but it's still somewhat enjoyable. It just needed a stronger story. Number 21, Black Panther. The way Wakandan society works in this movie doesn't make a lot of sense. They choose their leaders based on who's the strongest and most brutal in combat as opposed to who's the smartest or who does the best for the people, as it should be. They send spies to spy on their spies because they're so distrustful of each other. And the story feels a little bit too much like The Lion King. And at the end of the movie where we're going to open Wakanda to improve the world, you just had a war amongst yourselves. Like, you can barely run your own government correctly. So the action is good, but the story, when you really think about it, has a lot of problems when you delve into the mythology of it. Number 20, Iron Man 3. Now, I get why people initially hated the Trevor Slattery Mandarin twist, but now that ShangChi is out and has kind of come back with that, I think it was good. Though, I am one of the few people who never really had that big of a problem with it, because Captain America the Winter Soldier is all about conspiracies and those in power using puppets, and the film does a good job of setting that up for the later movies. So it never really felt that out of place to me. And the character of Harvey is, of course, a delight. I get why people have their problems with this movie, but I don't have as many problems with it as a lot of people do. Number 19, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. What holds this back a bit is the humor in this is definitely a lot more crass and vulgar than its predecessor, and also there are certain moments that are supposed to have a lot of emotional weight, but they decide that instead of letting the moment sit, let's immediately crack a joke. I do love Star-Lord's character development here, and it has a pretty emotional ending. I just wish they'd let the serious moments be more serious. Number 18, Avengers Age of Ultron. I do agree it is a step down from Avengers 1, but I don't have as many problems with it as a lot of people do. My main issue with it is the Black Widow Hulk romance that comes out of nowhere and then goes away just as quickly. But this movie gave us Scarlet Witch, one of my favorite characters, and James Spader is chilling as Ultron. And the cast, just like in the first Avengers, is very excellent as working off each other. So even though the story may be a bit weaker than the first, there's still a lot of good stuff in this movie. Number 17, Iron Man. Now, I'm not a fan of the Iron Man character, but I think as a movie, it is very well made. It's well directed, it has a pretty good story, there's not that much wrong with it, and the only reason it is so low on this list is just because we've come so far now, and the movies that came out were a lot better. Number 16, Doctor Strange. The visual effects in this movie are fantastic. Benedict Cumberbatch has great comedic timing. There's a lot of great philosophy in the script, but the third act could have been a little stronger. Number 15, Guardians of the Galaxy. The entire main cast is fantastic. They work very well off each other. It's a great ensemble piece. And, there's also these moments, apart comedy aside, there's also these moments where they're telling their tragic backstories, and you feel for them. And come on, this is a movie where two of the main characters are a talking raccoon and a talking tree. So for this to turn out as great as it did is a miracle. It's got humor, it's got heart, it's got a great cast, and great main characters. Number 14, Thor Ragnarok. The good Thor movie. I think this movie is great, but I'm just not a fan of Grandmaster Valkyrie, and while this is definitely the most fun of the Thor movies, it feels like such a tone shift from the other two that felt more like Shakespeare or Lord of the Rings. This feels like it's trying to somewhat replicate Guardians of the Galaxy. That's not a bad thing, it does it very well. I still love this movie, but you can definitely see that Taika Waititi took some inspiration from Guardians of the Galaxy. Number 13, Spider-Man Far From Home. I don't really buy into the relationship between Tom Holland and Zendaya. I find Zendaya's performance very boring, and that's true of all the movies, but very much so here as well. And Mysterio, who has kind of a cool backstory in the comics, is changed into Syndrome from The Incredibles. Still a fun movie, but it still has a few issues. Number 12, Spider-Man Homecoming. Spidey's first MCU outing is a fun one. It feels like a teen movie from the 80s with Tom Holland giving his all into the performance of awkward Peter Parker to live up to the expectations of one day being an Avenger. Lots of fun moments abound as he desperately tries to impress his mentor, though it does rely a little bit too much on Iron Man. It kind of feels like Spider-Man isn't really the main character of his movie. It feels like an Iron Man movie featuring Spider-Man. They could have relied on Iron Man a lot less. Number 11, ShangChi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie's fun, it's imaginative, it has a rich, well-developed mythology, it has fantastic, very well-directed martial arts sequences. What holds it back a little bit is Awkwafina. She's cringy. Her humor feels very forced. The rest of the movie, though, fantastic. Number 10, AntMan. A fun heist movie with a character you can easily sympathize with a great ensemble of side characters. Paul Rudd has great repertoire with everyone, Michael Pena steals the show as the comic relief sidekick, and Scott Lang is a well-written character who's made some mistakes in life and is given another chance, and you'll want to see him succeed. Number 9, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Everything great about the first movie is done again here, and done arguably even better. This time, Ant-Man gets a new partner with Wasp, and their dynamic is great. It's also even funnier than the first movie, and has a better villain. The first movie's villain was just a ripoff of the villain from Iron Man 1 to some degree, but this villain is one that you can sympathize with a bit more, and is far more interesting. Number 8, Black Widow. Brad Bird should take notes. This is what I wanted The Incredibles 2 to be. The main cast works very well off of each other, and it feels like The Incredibles, but with spies. The action's well directed, the story's intriguing, and the villain is one of the most despicable we've ever gotten in these movies. You just love to hate him. Number 7, Captain America, the First Avenger. This movie, apart from Iron Man, really stands out from the other Phase 1 films. Up to this point, we've met a guy who's a billionaire, a guy who's a scientist, a guy who's a god. This guy is just an ordinary man. A man with a broken body who wants to serve his country despite his limitations. He wants to do the right thing no matter what. What also makes it stand out from the other movies is this feels the least like a comic book, but in a good way. Iron Man was a sci-fi, Hulk was a monster movie, Thor was a fantasy. This is a World War II period piece, directed by Joe Johnston, who also did The Rocketeer, and you can see the influence here. It's definitely the most unique of the Phase 1 movies, and arguably the entire MCU. Number 6, Captain America Civil War. This is a fantastic movie, with one of the best third-act battles in the MCU. This movie delves into a very complex script where you can root for either side. What holds it back a bit for me, though, is now that we know how Cap's story ends in Endgame, it now means that he's kissing his niece. And also, Aunt May in this movie is a terrible guardian. She lets Tony Stark, this adult she's never met before, into her teenage nephew's bedroom alone, and then lets her nephew go someplace with a strange adult man who has him lie to her. So there's some problems with this. Number 5, Captain America the Winter Soldier. Much like the first Cap movie, this feels less like a comic book movie in the traditional sense, and more like a Tom Clancy-esque thriller. The script has intrigue and mystery, a fantastic story, and great chemistry between Cap and Black Widow. Number 4, The Avengers. The payoff to 5 years and 6 movies worth of setup, and it's fantastic. The cast works great off each other as they each kind of disagree and fight with each other at one point or another. That's very fun to see. It's very quick. It's very witty. It still holds up almost 10 years later. Number 3, Avengers Endgame. An almost perfect ending to 22 movies worth of story. Most of this movie I love, but my 2 main issues with it are they expect us to believe that on this huge planet with hundreds of people, all of the main relevant female characters just happen to be in the exact same spot at the exact same time. That's very contrived. Also, Cap going back to live with Peggy, just like I said earlier with Civil War, means he's kissing his niece. So almost perfect, not quite. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War. Considering this film has like 20 characters in it, it should feel very stuffed, but it works. Right off the bat, we're given one of the darkest starts to an MCU movie where we're introduced to Thanos and we witness the genocide of Asgard, and it only builds from there. The very high stakes are established right off the bat, and it just continues to build and build and build until a very intense, very shocking twist of any movie. But coming at number 1 is Spiderman No Way Home, the payoff to almost 20 years of Spider-Man movies, and it makes the countless Spider-Man reboots feel slightly more justified. The villains all work very well off each other, the 3 Spider-Mans all work very well off each other, and they each get a satisfying closure to their character arc. This was everything I wanted and more in a Spider-Man movie, so it comes in at number 1. Let's go ahead and share your ranking of the MCU movies, and I will see you in a few months when Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness comes out. Keep pushing that back. So whenever that comes out, that'll be my next MCU ranking.